Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Ian Chalmers, our Technical Director, and Jono Van Hazel, who's facilitating all the comms for us. We decided to do a webinar today because we really wanted to give people the opportunity to ask Ian and I questions. As we often present to investors and funds, people do get a chance to ask us quite a lot of questions. We thought this was pretty technically interesting. Whilst we do those somewhat exciting videos together, really a chance to people to interact with us is something that we're looking for. So we're trying this as something new today. So we won't take a long time on our presentation. We'll assume that people have read a little bit through the announcement and seen the presentation in advance online. If we go to our second slide, and I'll talk that we're saying slide transitions for anyone that's just listening on the phone and got the deck in front of them. I just really want to point out that this is based off the announcement we put out yesterday morning on the 30th of May, and that's got the full geological interpretations, it's got the gold equivalent formulas, it's got all of those things in it. So really encourage you to go back and look at that as well. So very briefly, the Northern Molong Palfrey project is that series of tenements that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. And in 2019, we made the discovery at Boda after, what would you say, Ian? Decades of work?
15 years.
Yeah, 15 years of work. And so I'll pass now across to Ian to talk about a little bit about where we're at and the resource itself. Do you want me to go to the next slide, mate?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time to listen. So the image you can see there is the actual, what we call the Boda-Kaiser corridor, and that corridor is at least 3 kilometres long. And Kaiser is a little known gold-copper occurrence. It's probably been known for 120 years, and there's a little bit of work done there in the late 1800s. But relatively limited amount of exploration work. Other than that, there's been exploration work done around the old mine site, but other than that, not very much. When we came in and we looked at all the data, we decided that there may be better targets based on the magnetics. We did some induced polarization geophysics and decided to drill a couple of holes into the Boda area. And the Boda area, which is what then came up with what we called the discovery hole. And that discovery hole was really encouraging, both from its assays, but also from the geology, the alteration style that we were looking at. It really was showing up what we call as a classic alkalic porphyry copper gold system. Not unlike Cadia, not similar to Cadia, but in the same general environment as Cadia and the same general environment that you see over at North Parkes. So we started broad-spaced drilling, trying to understand the geology, and that really focused on Boda, and then what we can see at Boda 2 and Boda 3 to the south. We did a little bit of early drilling at Kaiser just to see what the similarity in the system. Out of that, our focus was drawn to Boda because we started to see more high-grade breccia zones in the centre of Boda, and then we embarked on a fairly detailed drill program, as you can see by that plan. And the idea was to put a resource envelope around Boda in as quick a time as possible, and then decide how we would expand that out regionally.
So going to the next slide, slide 5.
So all of that work, all those drill holes, and there's about 70,000 metres in total of drilling. Obviously, 90% of it was in the Boda project itself, and we were able to then put a resource model around that, and what you can see there is what we call a 0.3 gold equivalent. And just to explain why we use gold equivalent, because in this deposit, the economic metals are both copper and gold, or gold and copper, and the best way to report those is by accumulating it into an equivalent value, then people can look at the dollar value of that material in the ground. So the 0.3 generated 624 million tonnes at 0.51 grams per tonne gold equivalent, which is about just over 10 million ounces of gold. And just a quick thing on the image before we move on, we often get told by people from outside that it's deep and there's nothing near the surface. In fact, you can see on that image there that where the words Boda are, that's actually the ground surface. So the mineralisation does come right up to the surface. Sure, the high-grade core, that big red blob you can see down in the middle, there's some up shallow too, are where the really high-grade parts are, but the actual ore body comes to the surface.
And depth, Ian? You can
So
see.
depth, the actual drilling goes down to over 1,000 metres vertical depth, but much of the resource is at about, you can see that 500 metre RL line, which is something like 900 metres below surface. So you get a feeling for what the dimensions are. The ground surface, by the way, for interest sake, is about 480 metres above sea level.
Okay, I'll go to the next slide.
So obviously looking at that 0.3 cutoff, we said, well, this is certainly an open pitable target, subject to economics. Let's look at the possibility of what if we have to go as an underground operation, look at large scale sub-level caving or block caving, what sort of grades would we need? And so we ran a 0.4 gold equivalent model, which you can see there now, which is, again, a very substantial body of copper and gold, the 353 million tonnes at about 0.63 gold equivalent, just over 7 million ounces. Again, same features are evident. Comes to the surface, the large high-grade blobs, and even on the, again, to look where the word Boda is, you'll see some purple colour there, which is some very, very high grades right on the surface. So, convinced us that the Boda is a substantial body with a lot of potential for future development.
Was it worth pointing out on the right-hand side of the screen how we've truncated the model as we head to the northwest?
Yes, good point. You'll notice there's a very sharp line on the right-hand side, and the reason we did that is because we made a decision about 2 months ago or 3 months ago to say, look, we're getting more mineralisation to the north of Boda into what we call the corridor zone, which links through to Kaiser. But we could keep drilling. We just keep drilling forever, and we just add it and make it bigger and bigger. But we decided we needed to get some kind of economic parameters around it so we can look at the development scenarios. So we put a line. And that line is just a straight line on a grid-based line. The ore body certainly doesn't cut off, and we're getting encouragement in deeper holes at corridor also.
Moving to the grade tonnage curve on slide 7.
So we generated this just to show from a perspective of people looking at the deposit what sort of options we had. So yes, we focused on the 0.3 and 0.4 because we still believe that the best scope is a large-scale bulk mining model, whether it be open cut or underground. But you can sort of see then that you can go out to different cut-offs. You can go up to 1 gram and you get something like it's about 20 or 30 million tonnes at something like 1.5 to 2 grams gold equivalent. So
it's a couple of million ounces equivalent there.
It's still a substantial deposit then. I should just point out that the left-hand side, those are exponential 2 times, so you can understand why there's it goes from 1 billion tonnes to 500 million tonnes to 256 million tonnes. It's not how you'd imagine it, but it's the best way to present the data.
Yeah, and I think talking briefly about mining, we often get asked how might you approach this. This is looking at a open cut with maybe a sub-level cave or block cave underneath type, as it stands looking at this grade tonnage operation. There could be like a smaller startup operation underground, but I like to think that an approach underground like Oz did at Carrapateena is certainly quite applicable in this environment. Yeah. And we think, with the mineralisation going to surface, an open cut is an opportunity, and similarly we think that at Kaiser Duke when we eventually get into that.
Yes, yep, correct.
Moving to slide 8.
So this is a really good representation of the 3 kilometre long Kaiser Boda corridor, as we call it. And you can see all the drilling that's been done. I should add that this is just the Alkane drilling. We didn't put the historic drilling at Kaiser on this map. But we can see what we did. And then we really did focus in on that Boda area. It's about a kilometre strike length that we've included in the resource. And you can see that, yes, there's a mineralisation comes to the surface, but certainly the really high-grade zones are located about 400, 500 metres below surface. But those zones are interesting geologically, not only because of the grade, but also because they tell us that elsewhere in the system we can find high-grade breccias. And you look at the Boda 2 section, very limited holes, but there's some quite nice high-grade intervals deep down there. And we think that we can use the information that we're generating to vector onto those high-grade zones. And then at Kaiser, as we've previously announced, we're doing a shallow drill out at Kaiser at this stage to look at its resource potential, open pit resource potential. So that drilling will be largely RC, down to about 250 metre vertical depth, and that you can see that at where the 250 metre line is on the left-hand side. So it'll do two things. It'll provide us another opportunity for further open pittable material, but also help us vector into high-grade zones underneath Kaiser at depth as part of a longer-term development strategy in that area too.
We're still planning a few holes, so to speak, deeper in between, through corridor in between Boda and Kaiser over the coming financial year.
Absolutely, yeah, certainly the RC drilling that's going on in corridor now, we don't have anywhere near the results to put that out as a release. Again, looking for vectors, vectoring and say, well, what does the mineralisation look like underneath corridor? Will there be deeper targets? And the short answer to that, yes, there will be. And it's quite probable that Kaiser, corridor, Boda 2 will ultimately link up as one very, very large mineralised system.
It's got the hallmarks of that. Going to slide 9.
I think this one, just to demonstrate what the ore body looks like. So this is a slice through the middle of Boda ore body. And you can see it's sort of a lozenge-shaped body. It does come to the surface. There are places where there's patches where it doesn't come up, but there are zones where it does come to the surface. But again, the key thing there is that high-grade breccia zone, sitting down about minus 250 metre RL, but going right up to the surface. And then lots of other high grades, that other high-grade pod just off to the right-hand side of that deeper one there as well. So it gives you a feel for what the deposit looks like if you start putting it into slices.
Thanks, mate. So I think we throw open now to some questions. I'm sure that you'll have some. But if I summarise, for us this is an initial resource. As Ian said, we wanted to put something out to let people start to understand what we think about economics. Our coming financial year, we're doing RC drilling at Kaiser Duke, which we're hoping to put a resource out before the end of the year. We're doing deep drilling down at Boda 2-3 and in between Kaiser and Boda at depth. And as well as that, right back at the start, we do have some greenfield exploration in Drill Creek, up at Murga, etc. And so that's going right back to traditional basic methods across the rest of our tenement package. So that's what we should see coming in the year. So over to you for questions.
Thank you.
Check if there's any questions on the line first.
Yes, thank you. If you wish to ask a question via the phones, you'll need to press the star key followed by the number 1. If you wish to ask a question via the webcast, please type your question into the Ask a Question box. Your first question via the phones comes from Dylan Kelly with Ord Minnett. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Ian, Nick, and congratulations on getting this one out. It's been a long time coming.
Thanks, mate.
Firstly, just in terms of the size and the shape, I know coming into this we weren't too sure, but the size of this thing looks quite enormous, even at a higher cutoff grade increment at, 0.4. Could you just dig in a little bit to the detail, some of the points you made before, Ian, around, say, what you could be thinking about in terms of a starter pit here, or some of those high-grade breccias that are poking through the surface? I didn't realise we had mineralisation sitting right at the top at surface that could be taken out earlier in a plan.
Yes, I mean, just to reinforce what I was saying, I mean, the ore body does come to the surface, and there's virtually no oxidation. And it's remarkable when you make a discovery like this, you actually go back and have a close look on the ground, and you can actually hit rocks on the surface which show disseminated sulfides in them on the surface. So there is no doubt that part of the upper part of Boda will be open pittable. And the high-grade core gives us the opportunity to focus in on that. And I mean, this is from the surface, from an open pit sense. We can focus in on that, so you could have a starter pit that tries to maximise the returns in the short term by going after those higher grades. But yes, certainly the body is a very large, classic porphyry copper gold type shape going down at depth.
Okay, and so in terms of potential breccias, am I right in thinking some of those breccias have actually been defined closer to surface? yeah, in that model. If I look at slide, slide 7? Slide 6. So is that dirt that's sitting at what, north of 1 to 2 grams, 2 grams a tonne over what, about 500 metres?
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing that changed as we did the drilling, we thought initially that the breccia zone, I think that we probably conveyed this publicly, that the breccia zone we thought was going to be a tabular-like body. As it turned out, it's not tabular-like, it's more like a tree. So you have the central trunk, but then you're coming towards the surface, it branches out, going upwards, you have these various branches. So you've got not a slab of breccia, you've got more of a zones of breccia material spread over like 100 metres width, rather than something that's confined to something that might be 30 or 50 metres wide. But they definitely come to the surface. And the key is, what do those things do along strike? And we've got enough information to say the model that we've got about the tree analogy is probably quite real. And just over time, we'll just drill those out, continuing to the north and to the south and at depth. I'm not sure if I answered your question properly, but that's sort of trying to give the impression that it's not just one, the breccia zone is not just one slab-like body that we might have thought 12, 18 months ago.
Okay, fair enough. Just a quick question on the test work. So yeah, you're right. It's remarkable that you don't have any oxidization at all. So, is the way to think about this is just purely, say, fresh? Is there any sort of transitional or oxide material sitting anywhere within the resource that we can think of? And is that why you've managed to get out some really good initial test work? That's what, 85% sort of notional recoveries across the group?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it is surprising.
And no different at Kaiser Duke, yeah?
No difference at this stage at Kaiser Duke. I mean, it may change. We don't know enough about Boda 2 at this stage to make any comment. The other good thing about the mineralisation, it's very simple. It's dominantly chalcopyrite. So we had a little tiny bit of covellite and obviously bornite in some of the deeper grades, but it's pretty simple mineralogy when you look at it. Very simple to design a flow sheet based on that.
No, I can imagine. Yeah, it's remarkably simple. So that's particularly pleasing to see. I'll finish off just one final question, and just in regards to, say, next steps. Can you just talk us through the need to sort of balance doing some infill versus, say, perhaps testing a lot of strike extensions up towards Kaiser and Duke with some deeper holes, or even going back to Finn's Crossing? How are you trying to balance the needs to keep going and keep pushing the discovery versus trying to come up with an economic model here?
I mean, talking at a high level first, what we think, because we're not launching immediately into mining, Dylan, we're not looking to move Boda to indicated, right, immediately. What we're really looking to do is increase our knowledge set over that entire corridor and build up more of an inferred picture, because what we're trying to work out for ourselves is, do we have other high-grade breccias, and what's the size and scale that we should be thinking of with respect to a potential future mining facility, and where might we actually locate that in terms of really early environmental work? So our focus is a lot more on extensions, expansion, and some of the greenfields work than it is on doing further drilling within Boda itself, unless our model slightly changes and we want to chase stuff down at depth.
Yep.
Okay, congrats again, guys. I'll pass it along and return for a few more.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Vincent Bassani with Petra Capital. Please go ahead.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thanks, Vince.
Yep.
Hey Nick. Hi Ian, how are you going?
Oh, battling along.
We're well.
Always battling. Hey, mine was more simple. I mean, obviously we've followed the progress of this over the last 3 years since you made that initial discovery, and it's just been like in-depth and very, very focused in terms of how you've gone about it. In terms of maybe bringing it into some sort of go-ahead, you've had to spend a lot of time with the licensing authorities here in New South Wales for a long period of time. Can you run through what would be required in terms of licensing and kind of the work that needs to be done from here to bring it to some sort of licensing
fantastic
agreement?
question. Yeah, fantastic question. So I think let's talk about regulatory versus infrastructure setup, right? So if we cast to Tomingley, we discovered those extensions in 2018, early 2018. We thought they were there, but that's when we put them. And so we're going to be getting that approval for those extensions, having done land transactions and a whole host of other stuff, in the middle of this year. So that's 18, 19, 20, 21. So it's 4 odd years later. And that is for effectively a brownfields, although it's greenfields mining area extension. So if we look at this, logically the minimum is going to be 4 years. We will start the early work on environmental stuff, just baseline monitoring and stuff, in the course of the coming months. But Vince, you're really talking a 5-year process, assuming that you don't get major pushback. We have a couple of years to do pre-work. Let's call it another 2 odd years to do, because we have to put out conceptual studies and pre-feasibilities. But then we also have to do landholder negotiation, water sourcing, interact with the people that run the wind farm around, an economic transition for them. So that the absolute fast-tracked minimum when you put those together is 7 years from now. If you look at other mines and mining things, a more realistic time frame is in the sort of 10 to 12-year mark. Particularly when you consider to production, particularly when you consider infrastructure development on top of that. And by that I mean open pit, start a decline to progress a sub-level cave.
Got it. Thanks, Nick. Thank you for that. That's the only question I had. I mean, our previous caller did answer a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask as well, so thank you.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you. Once again, if you wish to ask a question via the phone, please press star 1. Your next question comes from Brett McKay with Petra Capital. Please go ahead.
Morning, gents. Great result. Well done. Interesting in the way that you're sort of thinking about growing this resource, and obviously Boda's a cracking start, but some of the potential in the other areas is now clearly going to be your focus. What sort of time frame and work program do you think is ahead of you to define that large area? Like I said, Boda, lots of infill drilling there, now stepping out 3-kilometre corridor. Is this going to be 2 or 3 rigs for the next couple of years at least, or is it longer than that? I'm just trying to understand at what point do you guys feel like you've covered off on enough of that corridor to be confident you have what you need to then make those applications, start doing the scoping study, and move the project towards that sort of development pathway rather than the exploration and knowledge pathway?
Yeah. Thanks, Brett. I think one of the things we can do is we can do fairly wide space drilling. Say in the Boda 2 Kaiser corridor, we can do broad space drilling, maybe 100 metre or 200 metre, and then 1 or 2 holes per section. I think we know enough about the alteration pattern, the vectoring, to know where we are in the system then, and to say how much effort do we need to put into this. So let's say we drill 6 holes between Boda and Kaiser. From that, we'll be able to determine whether it's an immediate short-term target and keep focusing, or the drilling that we're doing at Kaiser currently might say you should focus here. So it's a balancing act between certainly a commitment to keep drilling and a commitment to explore that 3,000 metre corridor. At the same time, look at the most cost-effective way to do detailed drilling inside Boda itself. And again, we haven't really come up with the workable model for that. We know what we need to do, but it's a function of how we do it, or the most cost-effective and time-effective way of doing that.
If I can expand a little, we have budgeted to have those couple of rigs running for the next few years. Right? So we do, and what Ian's talking about is where do we put those? And so if we look at it from a mining perspective, what we want to do is work out the sort of size and scale like I referred to, which is why we're going to extend along the corridor over the next year rather than doing infill drilling. But once we think to ourselves, oh, okay, this looks like it's a 15 million tonne per annum thing that starts with an open cut and then goes to sub-level underneath it, then we'll shift our focus to making that a lot harder, as in more data-driven resource drilling program. Because once we start, it's the environmental work, as Vince alluded to, and the early work of layout and land that then becomes your constraint in terms of time. And you have a lot of other drilling that you can do in that intervening 4 to 5 years for satellite deposits. So that's why our focus over the next 2 years really is in the existing corridor, plus we'll put probably about 15-20% of our effort into the pure exploration thing in the satellite deposits to the northwest particularly.
Yep.
Okay, understood. Thanks for that. And just a second question really on the cutoff grade, how you've gone about that. You know, I'd note some of the similar types of deposits, both in Australia and offshore, use an NSR type of cutoff grade.
Yep.
And if you sort of back solve for where you guys are at, I'd say maybe you're a bit higher than what others have reported on an NSR basis. What point do you take a view on future copper pricing, future gold prices, and say, okay, this works at a lower grade, which clearly bulks out mineralisation and allows you to, you know, conceptually, at the very, very bare minimum, conceptually look at this as a big, low-grade bulk system, which would then inform, you know, how you go about developing it. Just that cut-off grade at that lower end is going to be a very important and determining factor in my view.
It is, and to do that next step, we will do our own scoping level study and costing and meters and geotechnical things, right, to give a more detailed breakdown of that cost in the exact environment, which is why we lent towards the higher end of the NSR to make sure that we weren't lowballing at this point. You know, we're quite conservative in that space. But in order to go to the granularity of, you know, is this $25? Is it $22.63? You know, whatever, that sort of thing. Then we ourselves will go through our own scoping study work. But Ian, you know, if you want to refer, because we actually have a question coming in on the web as well, to some of the other projects we looked at that we thought were the most comparable.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's interesting. We did a fairly, I won't call it a detailed study, but put together a lot of data. And we also have a consultant working with us, a guy called Dr. Alan Wilson. Alan did his PhD on Cadia Ridgeway probably 15, 20 years ago, and then has embarked globally as a particularly alkalic porphyry expert. And he's done a lot of work in South America and a lot of work in the Golden Triangle in British Columbia. And he's certainly pointed us towards other deposits. Now, I can rattle off lots of names, but the British Columbian Geological Survey put out some very, very good data on projects in BC, and so that's worth having a look at those. But one I will quote is, Newcrest bought into Red Chris, a year or 2 years ago. 2 years now. I mean, the open pit grades at Red Chris, and I haven't gone back in detail analysed the operating data for it, but Red Chris gold grade is 0.28, 0.24, and the copper grade is about 0.26. So, and that's an economically viable mine in British Columbia today. So those are the sort of things that we looked at, and as Nick said, we've erred on being more conservative, just until we really got a good handle on costs. And I mean, we've seen other things like, not just going to sit here and promote other companies, but Sol Gold have a couple of projects in Ecuador, and they've recently published another resource, an open pit resource for what they call their TAM deposit, and its copper grade is 0.2 or 0.24, gold grade's 0.19. Now, Red Chris and the TAM deposit are the reverse to what we are. We've got gold higher than copper, so we're a gold copper deposit. Those are copper gold deposits. But those things, and those guys, again, you're going to have to go and read the data, but they've been doing scoping studies of Sol Gold, scoping studies in that deposit, and you can get an idea for the cost structures, and that's sort of where we need to go, as Nick said.
To go to the next step, yeah. Did that answer it sufficiently, mate?
Yeah, no, very good. I've also done that work, and like I said, I think that there is scope on an equivalent basis to look at a lower cut-off grade, but I guess that's for you guys to do the work on down the track once you understand the broader system.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Look at the grade tonnage graph, and yes, you can sort of go to the left and you can look at different cut-offs.
It's tempting.
You get some big numbers.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right, thanks, gents. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Tony Simpson as a private investor. Please go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm looking at the history of Kaiser, which was originally a copper mine, then moved into copper gold. Couldn't that be pretty much a viable open pit from the very beginning?
At Kaiser?
Yes, Tony. That's exactly what we're doing now. That's why we're drilling it out, because the historic work and the previous exploration really focused on what is an outcropping high-grade breccia zone, which is the old Kaiser deposit. I mean, it's not a resource. I'll be loose with these numbers, but a deposit tonnage was put around about 500,000 tonnes, 1 gram gold and 1% copper around the little tiny deposit that's there. Other companies have gone in and drilled around that and got the same sort of grades that we're seeing at Boda. When we drilled to the east onto an IP target we call Duke, we got some very good intersections from surface, very good intersection surface. So that's what we're doing right now with the RC drilling. We're effectively pattern drilling that deposit and the extensions out to the east of what we call Duke, with the idea of it being a potential open cut.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no further phone questions at this time. I'll now hand the conference over to Mr. Jonathan Hazel for any webcast questions.
Thanks a lot. We've actually addressed, I believe, all the questions around the timing and the grade and the comparables that have been mentioned on the website forum. One point we will make is that, yes, this webinar will be available as a recording afterwards, so if anyone has missed any sections, they'll be able to go back and
we'll put that up on our website, the links to that, yeah.
But I believe that's actually all the questions that have come through, both on the phone line and on the online Q&A forum.
In which case, I will wrap up. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, appreciate your interest in dialing in, and Ian and I certainly look forward to talking to many of you more about this and bringing you more results as they come to bear.
Yep. Thanks very much. Yep.